The porch light caught her first a woman in a tailored coat, standing at a chain-link fence, breath fogging in the cold, a leather folder clutched against her chest like a wound. Evelyn Cross had rejected Mason Holt 7 times. 7 rejections. 7 form letters. 7 closed doors. Now she was the one waiting on his gravel driveway at 9:47 on a Tuesday night, knuckles white around a $12 million contract that was bleeding out in real time. Inside the small house, a 6-year-old girl read a storybook aloud at the kitchen table. Her father stepped onto the porch in a flannel shirt holding a wrench. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had been waiting. What had the woman in the tailored coat seen in his file that she could not unsee? Stay with this story until the end. The town of Millhaven sat just off Interstate 80, the kind of place where the diner stayed open till midnight, because the truckers needed coffee, and the truckers needed somewhere to sit. Mason Holt had lived there for 4 years. He owned a small house at the end of Birch Lane, a chain-link fence around a yard with 1 stubborn maple, and a fleet of 11 trucks parked behind a corrugated steel garage on the edge of town. The sign above the garage door said Holt Logistics in plain black lettering. He had painted it himself. Before Millhaven, there had been a different life, 600 miles east. A corner office on the 17th floor of a glass building, a budget that ran to 9 figures, 430 trucks under his name, as Chief Operating Officer of the Midwest Division at Meridian Logistics. He had walked away from all of it the week after Caroline died, sold the suits and the watches, packed his daughter into the cab of a used Peterbilt, and started over with 1 truck and a phone that wouldn't stop ringing for a month before it finally did. Bonnie was 6 now. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's quiet way of watching people before she spoke. Every morning, Mason packed her lunchbox with a sandwich, a thermos of milk, and a small folded note that said something different each day. Every evening, he came home in time to read to her before bed. He owed her that much. He owed her more than that. In November, he submitted his first application to Cross Freight Solutions. The rejection letter came back in 11 days. Fleet size insufficient for vendor onboarding, it said. No specific number was attached. He searched their public vendor policy and found no such requirement. He filed the letter in a manila folder, made dinner, and read Bonnie a chapter of Charlotte's Web. The second application went out in January. This time, he attached a cover letter highlighting his 12 years in regional freight management, his clean safety record, and his existing relationships with 3 Tier 2 retailers. The response came back in 9 days. Cross Freight Solutions, the letter explained, was prioritizing partners with established cold chain capacity. Mason set the letter down on the kitchen table and considered it for a long moment. Cross Freight had no significant cold chain operation of its own. He knew this because he had pulled their last 2 filings and read them line by line. By the 3rd application, he had completed 2 certifications in temperature-controlled transport and added a refrigerated trailer to his fleet, leased on favorable terms from an old supplier in Cleveland. The rejection this time cited insufficient commercial credit history. Mason's commercial credit was in fact exceptional. He had carried no debt into Holt Logistics, paid his vendors in 7 days, when most paid in 30, and held a line of credit at the regional bank that he had never drawn on. He filed the 3rd letter beside the first 2. That spring, he drove 3 hours to Cross Freight's headquarters and asked for 5 minutes with Evelyn Cross. He got them. She came out of her office in a charcoal suit, her chief of staff, Giselle Marsh, trailing 2 steps behind with a tablet, and walked him into a conference room with a glass wall. She was younger than he had expected, perhaps 38, with the kind of posture that came from spending years learning how to take up space in rooms designed for other people. He had read about her. She had inherited a freight company 2 years from bankruptcy and turned it into a $140 million operation in 7 years. The trade press called her ruthless. The people who worked for her called her exact. She looked at his folder for 30 seconds. She looked at his face for less than that. Then her eyes flicked down across his collar, which had been turned once and resewn by his own hand, and across his shoes, which had been resoled the previous month at the cobbler on 4th Street because new shoes could wait. He watched her see those things. He watched her decision happen. "We'll be in touch," she said. The 4th rejection came that night by email. It listed no reason at all. Mason drove back to Millhaven in the dark and sat in his truck in the driveway for 10 minutes before he went inside. Bonnie was already asleep. The babysitter, a college student named Hannah from 2 doors down, asked if everything was okay. He said it was. He paid her and walked her to the door. In the kitchen, he opened the manila folder and added the 4th letter to the others. The 5th and 6th applications went out in May and July. Both were rejected on the grounds of a new vendor minimum policy, requiring 15 trucks or more. Mason ran the cross-freight vendor portal twice. He checked the public-facing onboarding page 3 times. The 15-truck policy existed only in the body of the letters that came back to him. It was not posted anywhere. It was not in any signed document he could find. Around the time of the 6th rejection, he started having breakfast on Saturday mornings at the diner on Route 9, where an old freight dispatcher named Isaac Reeves had been pouring coffee for 2 decades. Isaac had run nights at Meridian, back when Mason was new, before the promotions, before the corner office. They had stayed in touch through the years, the way men in the freight business stay in touch. Phone calls every 6 months, sometimes longer. Now Isaac lived 20 minutes from Mason and kept a portable weather radio behind the counter, because old habits never quite leave a man who had once been responsible for getting trucks home through ice. "You're still going after Cross?" Isaac said one morning, sliding a plate of eggs across the counter. "I am. They're going to keep saying no." "I know." Isaac watched him over the rim of his own coffee mug. "Then why?" Mason did not answer. He cut into the eggs and ate them slowly. Isaac did not ask again. The 7th application went out in September. Mason did not send it through the portal this time. He drove to Cross Freight's headquarters with the paper file in his hand and asked the receptionist if Evelyn Cross would see him. She said no appointment was on the calendar. He said he would wait. He sat in the lobby for 2 hours and 32 minutes, reading a trade magazine and answering one email from his dispatcher about a delayed pickup in Toledo. At 4:11 in the afternoon, Evelyn Cross walked out of the elevator bank with 2 associates in tow. Her eyes passed across the lobby. They found Mason. They moved on. She stepped into the elevator and the doors closed behind her. The 7th rejection email arrived at 7:40 that evening. It used the same template as the 2nd. In the kitchen at Birch Lane, Mason added the 7th letter to the folder, closed it, and slid it back into the drawer beneath the silverware. He helped Bonnie spell the word umbrella for her homework. He cooked spaghetti. He read her 3 chapters of a book about a girl who finds a horse in a thunderstorm, and when she fell asleep with one hand curled into the corner of her pillow, he turned off the lamp and stood in the doorway for a long moment, listening to the quiet rhythm of her breathing. Then he went back down to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and pulled out a different folder. This one was thicker. It held 9 months of notes in his own handwriting, 3 printed industry briefings from a paid subscription service, a hand-drawn map of Cross Freight's distribution corridors with red marks at 3 intersections, and a draft contract he had written himself in pencil 18 months earlier and revised 4 times since. He sat down at the table and reopened the map. The northern corridor was the weakness. He had seen it the first time he pulled Cross Freight's route filings. Their volume up through the Wisconsin and Minnesota lines ran lean balanced for the current contracts, but with no slack, no reserve capacity, no secondary partners, no margin for a sudden surge. The lanes were tight, and the partners were small. If anything broke, the whole upper half of their network would slow inside of 3 days. He had also seen the retail core signals, not the public announcement that would not come for another month, but the procurement filings, the warehouse leases in Toledo and St. Paul, the hiring patterns at their regional offices. Retail Corp was preparing to open a Midwest distribution bid worth somewhere between $10 and $14 million annually. Cross Freight had the relationships, the geography, and the political weight to win it. They would almost certainly win it, and when they did, the volume would slam straight into the Northern Corridor, the weakest part of their system, on the worst route in the worst season. Mason had not been applying for work. He had been positioning. He had been seeking a documented, time-stamped, repeatedly verified application history. 7 submissions across 11 months, so that when the bottleneck arrived, and Evelyn Cross began looking for somebody who could move freight through Wisconsin in November, without breaking, there would already be a file on her desk with his name on it. Filed by her own staff. Reviewed by her own hand. Rejected, yes, but on record. Easy to find. Easy to reopen. Easy to bring back into the room without it looking like a favor. He had not needed the job. He had needed the table. There was something else too. Something he did not write into any of his notes, because writing it would have made it small. The way Evelyn Cross had looked at his collar in that conference room. The way her eyes had moved before her mouth did. He had spent 20 years inside the freight industry, watching men in better suits than his decide other men were not worth the chair they were sitting in. And he had walked away from the company once because he could no longer stand to be the one in the better suit. He did not need Evelyn Cross to apologize. He needed her to see him clearly on the record, in a room where she could not look away. The contract would come second. The seeing would come first. He closed the folder. He washed the glass and turned out the kitchen light. Upstairs, his daughter was still asleep. He stood at her doorway again for a moment, the way he did every night. And then he went to bed. The visit from Evelyn Cross would come in the second week of November. The Retail Corp announcement came 2 days after the 7th rejection. The trade press called it the largest regional distribution award of the year, a $12 million annual contract covering retail freight across 7 states in the upper Midwest, with the entire Northern Corridor at the heart of the route plan. Cross Freight Solutions was the named carrier. Mason read the press release, standing at the kitchen counter at 6 in the morning. He drank his coffee. He drove to work. For 8 weeks after that, the world he had been waiting for assembled itself exactly the way he had drawn it on the kitchen table. Cross Freight signed the contract. They began retrofitting their dispatch software to handle Retail Corp's electronic shipping protocols. They hired 4 additional yard workers and leased 6 refrigerated trailers from a competitor at premium rates. The first delivery window was set for the second week of November, with 30 days of staggered loads running through Wisconsin and Minnesota and the Dakotas. The press releases used words like historic and transformational. The procurement filings, which only a handful of people read carefully, told a different story. Volume was loading onto lanes that had never carried it before. The system was being stretched into a shape it had not been built for. Mason kept reading the filings. He kept eating breakfast on Saturday mornings at Isaac's Diner. He kept his 11 trucks running on the routes they had always run. He waited. On the second Monday of November, at 6:14 in the morning, every driver in the Cross Freight fleet, 22 trucks across 3 terminals, failed to log on for the morning dispatch. The strike was clean. It was coordinated. It was timed with a precision that had nothing to do with the natural rhythm of labor unrest. By 8 in the morning, the union representative was on the local news with a list of grievances that had been filed 2 weeks earlier and acknowledged by Cross Freight's HR department with what the representative called contemptuous silence. By 10, the trade press had picked it up. By noon, Retail Corp's procurement office had called twice, asking for confirmation that the Tuesday loads would still leave the yard. Evelyn Cross was in her office on the 17th floor of the headquarters building, watching the dispatch board on the wall go from green to red in clusters. She had spent the morning on the phone. Every carrier of any size in the Midwest was already committed for Thanksgiving freight, and the spot rates for emergency capacity had jumped 40% inside of 3 hours. Internal capacity. What Cross Freight could move with its own salaried drivers and the few owner-operators not under union contract would cover roughly 60% of the retail core obligation. 60% meant a material breach of contract. Material breach meant penalty clauses, reputational damage, and a clause buried on page 41 that would let retail core walk away clean. 7 years of work would be erased before Christmas. By Monday evening, the picture had not improved. Every carrier she could find had said no twice in slightly different language. She left the office at 11 that night and slept for 3 hours. She was back at her desk at 5 the next morning. Across the floor in the small glass office beside Evelyn's, Giselle Marsh sat very still at her desk for nearly a minute after she arrived. Then she opened a drawer, pulled out a manila folder, walked into Evelyn's office without knocking, and laid it down on the desk between them. "What is this?" Evelyn said. "His 6th application." Giselle's voice was quiet. "Filed in July." Evelyn did not pick up the folder. She looked at the name printed on the tab. She looked at her chief of staff. "He's small," Evelyn said. 11 trucks, mostly long haul, 2 of them refrigerated. He's licensed in every state we need. His safety rating is in the top 5%. He has weekly availability, and he is 40 minutes from the Madison terminal. He's been turned down 6 times. 7, Giselle said. The room did not move for a long moment. "Why have we been turning him down?" Evelyn asked, and the question came out flatter than she had meant it to. Giselle did not answer right away. She had worked for Evelyn Cross for 4 years. She had learned the shape of the woman's silences, and she had learned to be careful with what she said inside them. "I'm not sure," Giselle said. "I went back through the file. The reasons in the letters don't match the documentation we hold on him. They never did. I don't know what the real reason was." Evelyn looked down at the folder on the desk. She looked at her own hands. She remembered him. She remembered him very clearly, in fact, with the kind of clarity that came back unbidden and uninvited. 5 minutes in the glass conference room in March. A man in his early 40s, with calm eyes and a steady voice. A folder he had organized himself, neatly tabbed, every page lying flat. The collar of his shirt had been turned and resewn. She had seen the line of new stitches without thinking about it, the way she always saw such things, because she had grown up in a house where her own mother had turned and resewn the same collars for her father's work shirts every 6 months for 12 years. And his shoes. She had looked at his shoes. The rubber soles had been redone professionally, but visibly the kind of repair a man chose when he had decided that new shoes could wait. She had registered all of it inside the first 90 seconds of the meeting. She had registered it the way her father's old partners used to register the same things on her before she had learned to wear the right suits and the right shoes and stop letting them see her flinch. She had decided about Mason Holt before she had read a line of his application. She had done to him what had been done to her in rooms she had spent 20 years climbing out of. Evelyn closed the folder slowly. She placed her palm flat on top of it and held it there for a moment, as though it might fly off the desk on its own. "Find me his address," she said. Giselle did not ask which address. She did not ask why. She turned and walked back to her desk. By 9 that Tuesday night, Evelyn was driving north on Route 9 with a printed contract in the passenger seat and her hands tight on the wheel. It was 41 degrees and falling. The headlights of oncoming trucks washed across her face every few seconds. When she turned onto Birch Lane and saw the small house at the end of the street with its yellow porch light and its chain-link fence and its one stubborn maple tree in the yard, she sat in her car for almost 2 minutes before she got out. Mason was inside reading to his daughter. He heard the car door close. He saw the silhouette through the kitchen window. He marked his place in the book, kissed Bonnie on the forehead, and asked her to wait upstairs for 10 minutes while he talked to a visitor. He picked up the wrench he had been using on the kitchen faucet earlier and set it down again. Then he picked it back up, not because he needed it, but because his hand wanted something in it, and stepped out onto the porch. He looked at her across the yard. He was not surprised. "Mr. Holt," she said. Ms. Cross. She walked to the fence. The folder under her arm was the same color as the 7 rejection letters in his kitchen drawer. You know why I'm here? I have a guess. She told him the number. She told him the percentage they were short. She told him the deadline. She did not apologize. He had not expected her to, and he respected her slightly more for not pretending. He listened without interrupting. When she was finished, he opened the gate and let her into the yard, and they stood there in the cold for a moment, under the porch light. "I'll do it," he said. "On my terms." He laid them out the way a man lays out furniture in a room he has been planning for a long time. Full routing autonomy across his portion of the corridor, he would not be dispatched by Cross Freight's office. He would dispatch himself with handoff data shared in real time. Payment weekly, not net 30. And if his completion rate exceeded 85% over the 30-day delivery cycle, Cross Freight would enter into a documented review for a long-term partnership agreement. Not a promise of one, but a review formal on the record, with terms to be negotiated in good faith. Evelyn listened. She understood what he was asking for, and she understood what he wasn't asking for. He was not asking for forgiveness. He was not asking for an apology. He was asking for a chair at a table, with the chair on the record. "Send the terms to my office tomorrow morning," she said. "I'll countersign them by noon." He nodded once. She turned to go. At the gate, she stopped, and her hand rested on the latch for a moment. She did not look back at him when she spoke. "I'm sorry for the wasted year." "It wasn't wasted," Mason said. She got into her car and drove back to the city, and somewhere south of the county line alone on the dark highway, she pressed the back of her wrist hard against her own mouth and didn't cry. The first trucks rolled out of the Madison terminal 46 hours later. The 30-day execution window opened in the second week of November and ran straight into the teeth of pre-Thanksgiving freight saturation. Mason ran his own portion of the corridor from the cab of a Peterbilt. He drove himself for the first 3 days, then from the back office of his garage in Millhaven once the rhythm was set. His 11 trucks carried what they could. He brought in 2 additional units on short-term lease from a Cleveland supplier, the same supplier who had leased him his first refrigerated trailer 2 years earlier. And he picked up 3 more loads of capacity from a network of small operators he had been quietly cultivating relationships with for 18 months. Most of them had run from Meridian once in years, before the office and the corner suite, when Mason had been the man on the night phone making calls into snowstorms. Most of them owed him favors they had never been asked to repay. By day 11, his portion of the corridor was running at 91% on-time delivery. By day 15, the trade press had stopped writing about the Cross Freight strike. The union and management had reached a tentative agreement on day 9, and the company's own drivers were back behind the wheel for the long-haul routes. The smaller carriers Mason had assembled covered the northern corridor and the urgent loads. The system was breathing. Inside the headquarters building, Evelyn watched the dispatch board return from red to green, region by region, day by day. She read Mason's nightly status reports, the way some people read scripture once, for content, once for tone, once for what was not being said. She noticed that he never reported a problem he had not already solved. She noticed that he never claimed credit for a fix that had been collaborative. She noticed somewhere around day 18 that his reports used the word "we" more often than her own staff did. What neither of them noticed, yet what only Giselle noticed, because Giselle noticed everything, was that Carter Baines had been very quiet for almost 3 weeks. Carter Baines had sat on the Cross Freight board for 19 years. He had been the man Evelyn's father had trusted to manage the company through the long, slow decline of the founder's last decade, and he had been the man who had assumed with a confidence that had never quite recovered that he would be named interim chief executive when the founder retired. Instead, the founder had named his daughter, and Carter Baines had spent the 7 years since smiling at board meetings and waiting. He told himself in the way that men of his kind always tell themselves that his patience was a matter of principle. The company was being run too aggressively. The expansion was reckless. The founder's legacy was at stake. He believed this mostly the way a man believes the version of a story in which he is not the villain. He had not coordinated the strike alone exactly. He had simply spent 18 months developing what he called relationships of mutual understanding with 2 members of the union leadership, 2 of his own board allies, and a lawyer who specialized in corporate governance. He had set pieces on a board and waited for a moment to move them. The retail core contract had been the moment. On the 23rd day of the execution window, one of Mason's owner-operators, a man named Lewis Tate, who ran a single Kenworth out of Eau Claire, arrived at the Millhaven garage at 5 in the morning with a folded envelope in his coat pocket. He laid it on Mason's desk without speaking and waited. The letter inside offered Lewis a flat $15,000 payment to abandon his current contract within 72 hours, with a follow-on consulting arrangement at a freight company that would not be named until after the payment cleared. It was signed by a name Lewis did not recognize. The letterhead, when Mason held it up to the light, carried the faint watermark of a paper supplier used by exactly one law firm in the state. "Who else got this?" Mason asked. "One other driver I know of, maybe more." "Names." Lewis gave him the names. Mason sat at his desk for a long minute. He folded the letter and put it inside the manila folder beneath his desk, the same folder that had held the 7 rejection letters before he had moved them to a different drawer in October. He thanked Lewis for bringing it in. He told him to keep running his current loads exactly as scheduled and to report any further contact to Mason directly within the hour. He told him there would be a bonus on his next payment cycle that he had not earned and was not to discuss with anyone. Lewis nodded once and left. Mason picked up the phone. He called 2 men he had not spoken to in 3 years. Frank Delaney, a former dispatcher who now ran a small fleet in Iowa, and an owner-operator who had logged 250,000 miles from Meridian on Mason's watch. Inside of 40 minutes, he had committed capacity to backfill any driver who walked. He did not tell Evelyn Cross. He did not tell anyone at Cross Freight. He handled it the way he had handled everything for 20 years in the business, quietly, completely, and before the problem had a chance to become a problem. On the night of day 25, he made a recording. It was almost accidental. He had been on a long evening call with Lewis Tate going over the next day's pickup schedule when Lewis mentioned that he had been contacted a second time, this time by phone. This time by a man who had not been careful about identifying himself. The man had named names. He had referenced the board governance structure of Cross Freight Solutions. He had said certain things about the future composition of the Cross Freight executive team that no outside party should have known. Lewis, who had spent 2 days thinking about it, had recorded the call. He sent the file to Mason at 10:40 that night. Mason listened to it twice. He saved it. He did not send it to Evelyn. He did not send it because it was not yet time. Day 29 came on a Tuesday. By 11 that morning, the Cross Freight legal department received notice from outside counsel that Carter Baines had filed for an emergency meeting of the board of directors. The filing cited Section 12.4 of the company governance charter, a clause concerning the chief executive's authority to enter into substantive partnership agreements without board ratification when the financial commitment exceeded a defined threshold. The threshold was specific. The language was broad. Baines had quietly drafted and inserted the clause 18 months earlier as part of a routine governance update that nobody had read very carefully at the time. He had built his own door, and now he was opening it. The meeting was scheduled for the afternoon of day 32. Day 32 was the final delivery deadline for the first retail core cycle. Whether Mason finished or failed, Baines would walk into that boardroom on the same afternoon with the same charge that Evelyn Cross had entered into a major partnership agreement with a vendor previously rejected 7 times by her own staff, no less without proper board ratification in violation of Section 12.4. If the deliveries failed, the failure itself would be the proof. If the deliveries succeeded, The success would be framed as a stroke of luck that had concealed a governance breach. Either way, Baines had a path. Evelyn read the filing in her office at 3 in the afternoon. She read it 3 times. She set it down on her desk, and she looked out the window for a long while at the gray November sky. She did not call Mason. She had decided 2 weeks earlier that she would not call him during the delivery window unless something was actively on fire. He had his work. She had hers. The line between them was holding because she was respecting it. She called her own attorney instead and began preparing. The storm came in on the night of day 31. It started as light snow north of Eau Claire at 4 in the afternoon, and by 7, the entire northern corridor was under a winter storm warning. By 9, 2 interstates were down to a single plowed lane. By 10, the temperature had dropped to 11 degrees, and the wind was driving the snow sideways across the lanes, in walls that closed visibility to 50 feet. Mason was in the cab of his own truck on the eastbound shoulder of Route 29, parked at the rest stop outside Wausau, when the call came in from his lead dispatcher. 2 trucks were already running behind schedule. 14 delivery points remained on the route map. The cutoff for the contract's on-time performance metric was midnight at the end of day 32, 28 hours away, and the storm was projected to last for at least another 16. He looked at the dispatch screen. He looked out the windshield at the snow. He picked up the phone and he began to call his drivers. The first call went to Lewis Tate, who was already moving a Kenworth loaded with refrigerated freight 22 miles east of the Wisconsin Dells, running into a wall of white. Mason had Lewis pull off at the next exit hold for 15 minutes and wait for a rerouting. The second call went to a driver named Roy Tilford, who had 2 pallets to drop in a town called Antigo, and a tractor that had been losing oil pressure for 40 minutes. Mason listened to the engine over the line, asked 2 questions, and told Roy to limp the truck to the truck stop in Wausau and transfer the load to the relay driver Mason was sending up from Madison. The third call went to a young driver named Cole Reeves, who had never run a winter storm at this latitude before, and whose voice was thin in the way men's voices get thin when they are trying not to let it show. "You're going to drive at 35 miles an hour and not 1 mile faster," Mason said. "If you can't see the lines, you stop. If you stop, you call me. I'm not in a hurry. The contract is not in a hurry. You get there when you get there. Acknowledge." Acknowledged. He worked the route map the way a man works a chessboard he has memorized. 14 delivery points became 13 as he absorbed a smaller drop into an adjacent run. 13 became 11 as he split a Madison pickup across 2 drivers running the same northbound corridor. He moved a refrigerated load forward by 90 minutes so the truck could cross the worst stretch before the storm front collapsed onto the highway. He held 2 southbound trailers at the Eau Claire yard for 6 hours because the road south was clear and the road north was not, and a truck waiting on a clear road was worth more than a truck stuck on a closed one. At 11:20 that night, Isaac Reeves opened the diner on Route 9 and turned on every light in the place. The diner was not open at that hour. Isaac had not served a customer in the building since 7:30, but he had been on the phone with Mason since 9, reading the National Weather Service radar off his own laptop screen at the counter, calling out storm cells and wind shifts, and the rolling closures along Interstates 90 and 39 as the highway patrol updated them. He had set a portable scanner on the counter beside the coffee pot. He had set out a yellow legal pad and a sharpened pencil. He had not done this kind of work in 19 years, since the last winter he had run nights at Meridian. His hands remembered it before his mind did. He stayed on the line until 2 in the morning, and then again from 5 until 9. In Millhaven, Hannah had been at the Birch Lane house since Mason left for the corridor 4 days earlier. He had paid her in advance, asked her to plan for a long week, and given her the keys to the upstairs guest room. Bonnie woke at 6:45 with the snow piled against the bedroom window. Hannah made her oatmeal and explained that her father was helping people drive trucks through a storm and would be home as soon as he could. Bonnie nodded the way children nod when they are pretending to understand something they understand perfectly well. She asked if she could call him. Hannah dialed the number and handed her the phone. "Daddy." "Hi, sweetheart. Are you in the snow?" "I am." "Are you coming home tonight?" "I'm going to try very hard." "Will you read the next chapter?" "If I'm home in time, I will read you 2 chapters." "Okay." She did not ask any other questions. She handed the phone back to Hannah and went to find her crayons. The day moved the way storm days move, in long stretches of nothing and short bursts of everything. By noon, 8 of the 14 deliveries had cleared. By 3:11, the 2 trucks that had been running behind on the previous evening were now in front of the schedule because Mason had quietly shifted their loads to drivers with shorter routes and rolled their original loads into a relay system he had built on the fly between the Madison yard and a leased garage in Stevens Point. By 6 o'clock, 12 of 14 were done. The last 2 delivery points were in towns that were currently inside the worst of the storm cell, with town roads not yet plowed and 1 access road technically still closed. At 7:45, Cole Reeves called in from a side road outside a place called Phillips. He had driven into a drift and could not get out. Mason was in the cab of his own truck by then, 20 miles north of Wausau, running one of the deliveries himself. He listened to Cole's voice. He listened to what was behind the voice. He told Cole to stay in the cab, run the engine in 10-minute cycles, and keep the cabin warm. He called Isaac at the diner. Isaac called a wrecker service he had used in 1998. The wrecker reached Cole at 8:50. Cole was back on the road at 9:15. He made his delivery at 10:43. The 14th delivery, a small load of dry goods to a cross-freight client in a town called Rhinelander, was being driven by Frank Delaney, who had agreed to come up from Iowa for the week, as a favor that had no expiration date. Frank rolled into the receiving yard at 11:47 at night, 12 minutes before the midnight cutoff that closed the contract's on-time performance window. The receiving manager, a tired man with a thermos of coffee and a clipboard, signed the bill of lading. Frank took a photograph of it. He sent the photograph to Mason. Mason looked at it in the dim cab of his truck, parked at a rest stop he could no longer remember the name of, and he sat with the phone in his hand for a long moment without moving. The completion rate when his dispatcher ran the numbers at 2 in the morning came to 93.2%. At 3:15 in the morning, Mason composed an email from the cab of his truck. He attached 2 files. The first was the audio recording Louis Tate had sent him on day 25. The second was a single page of notes. Names, dates the watermark on the original letter, the phone records the timeline. He addressed the email to Evelyn Cross. He wrote 3 sentences in the body of the message. He did not say what they were for. He did not ask her to use them. He did not ask her for anything. He sent it. He had waited to send it until after the deliveries were done, because if he had sent it earlier, even 1 hour earlier, somebody in a room he was not in would have been able to say he had used it as leverage to protect his contract. He had waited until the work spoke for itself. He had waited until the work was on the record. Now the rest of it could go on the record too. Then he started the truck, and he drove home through the snow, and he reached Birch Lane at 4:50 in the morning. Bonnie was asleep. He took off his coat and his boots, and he leaned against the frame of her doorway, looking at her for a long time. He went into the kitchen, made himself a cup of coffee he did not drink, and lay down on the couch with his clothes still on. He slept for 2 hours. The board meeting convened in the 17th floor conference room of Cross Freight Solutions at 1 in the afternoon on day 32. Carter Baines spoke first. He spoke for almost 30 minutes. He laid out his case carefully, and with the practiced gravity of a man who had been rehearsing the same speech in some form or another for 7 years. The chief executive had entered into a substantive partnership arrangement with an outside vendor, a vendor previously rejected by the company's own onboarding process 7 times without bringing the agreement to the board for ratification. The financial commitment exceeded the threshold set by Section 12.4 of the Governance Charter. The vendor was small, underqualified, and selected under circumstances that suggested either desperation or favoritism. The contract had been signed at night off premises with no witnesses and no counsel. The pattern he suggested gently was concerning. He sat down. He did not look at Evelyn while he sat down. He had not, in fact, looked at her directly through the entire address. The chair of the board, a woman named Marjorie Ellsworth, who had served on the board since before the founder's retirement, turned to Evelyn and asked if she had a response. Evelyn stood. She had not slept the previous night. She had been in this building since 6 in the morning. She was wearing a dark blue suit and a single thin gold chain her mother had given her on the day she had been named chief executive. She placed 3 documents on the table in front of her, and she spoke to the room without raising her voice. The completion rate for the first retail core delivery cycle, which closed at midnight last night, was 93.2%. The contractual threshold for on-time performance is 85%. There is no material breach. There is no breach at all. She slid the first document forward. This is the performance report signed and verified by Retail Core's own receiving managers. She placed her hand on the second document. This is an audio recording with transcript and supporting evidence of a coordinated attempt by an outside party to bribe 2 of the contracted drivers into abandoning their loads during the execution window. The outside party identifies himself by reference and names this company's board governance structure in terms that no individual outside this room should have known. The recording was provided to me at 3:15 this morning by the partner running the operation. After the deliveries were complete, he did not provide it earlier. He could have. He chose not to. The room had gone very quiet. Carter Baines was no longer looking at the wall behind Evelyn's head. He was looking at the table in front of him. She slid the third document forward. This is the full employment and qualification history of the partner in question. His name is Mason Holt. He spent 12 years at Meridian Logistics. He was the chief operating officer of their Midwest division from 2018 until the spring of 2021, when he resigned for personal reasons following the death of his wife. He managed 430 trucks and a portfolio of contracts in excess of $300 million in annual revenue. 11 years ago, this company applied to be one of his subcontractors. We were turned down. She looked at the room then. She looked at every face in turn. She did not look at Carter Baines for any longer than she looked at anyone else. For the last year, this company rejected his vendor application 7 times. I signed the most recent of those rejections. I am responsible for that decision. I will not defend it. I will say only that the company is now in the position of having been saved materially, and on the record by the same man we spent a year refusing to seat at the table. She did not apologize for it. She let the sentence sit in the room. The vote that had been called to remove her became a vote to suspend Carter Baines from the board, pending an internal investigation. 7 in favor. 2 opposed. Carter Baines gathered his papers without speaking and walked out of the room at 1:48 in the afternoon. 3 nights later, Evelyn drove out to Millhaven again. She did not call ahead. She brought a folder with her. Mason met her on the porch. The wind was lighter this time. The snow had melted into the patches of brown grass beside the driveway. Bonnie was inside working on a school project at the kitchen table. Evelyn handed him the folder. He opened it on the railing of the porch and read it under the yellow light. It was a long-term partnership agreement. 3 pages of his own handwritten terms, drafted on the night of the 7th rejection 18 months earlier, and revised 4 times since, had been incorporated. Verbatim into the body of the contract, the autonomy provisions, the weekly payment structure, the language around capacity scaling and route ownership. She had not changed a word. He looked up at her. "I wrote the first draft of this a long time ago," he said. "I know. You read it." "I did. He nodded slowly. She smiled, then not the smile she used in conference rooms, the careful one with the corners held in place, but a different smile, smaller and more honest. The smile of a woman who had understood something and was not pretending to have understood it sooner. 3 months later, Holt Logistics ran 16 trucks. Mason was invited to join the Strategic Advisory Board of Cross Freight Solutions, not as a favor and not as restitution, but because he was the only person in the room Evelyn trusted to tell her the truth, without an agenda hiding behind it. He accepted on the condition that the meetings be held in the afternoon, so he could still be home in time to read to his daughter. He never missed a chapter,